What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and today we are checking out a Seiko Presage SARW025. A big thank you to the viewer that sent this in on loan, and thank you to all you guys that have been watching the channel, have been supporting me, have been subscribers, commenting, sending me emails, everything that you guys do for me I really do appreciate. And of course I really appreciate this viewer and all the rest that have loaned me watches for the channel. It just wouldn't be a successful channel without all of that support, so thank you very much. Now, this watch, the SARW025, very similar to a watch that I've reviewed in the past. That was the SARK011, as I recall. In terms of style and of aesthetic, they're very similar. The only real difference is that that previously reviewed watch featured a chronograph function. And truth be told, in a watch like this, basically it's certainly, I don't know, a dress watch. I mean, you could wear it as a casual everyday watch, but it's most definitely not a sports watch. I don't really need a chronograph function. And that was cool in that watch, don't get me wrong, but just not something that I would really want in my daily wear watch, at least of this style. This watch has everything you need and just a little bit more. What we have here is your basic 3-hand hour, minute, and seconds, along with a date subdial and an extra power reserve indicator. I always like having a power reserve indicator on a watch. Sometimes it throws the balance of the design off a little bit. That's a complaint that you commonly see from people. But I don't really mind it typically, as long as it's done well, as long as it's done tastefully, and I think it's done well here. Other than that, though, this is an absolutely stunning watch, and I shouldn't say other than that, because that's not an exception to the statement that this is a stunning watch. It really is. I guess I should say that there is one small complaint that I have, and I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record when I say it. It's a little too big for me. You'll see it on my wrist, you'll probably say, oh, it looks fine. Yeah, it does, but I'm not comfortable with watches of this style over 40 millimeters. That's just me. So that's probably going to be my only complaint about this watch. Otherwise, though, it's amazing. It pulls a lot of its design cues in from the very first Seiko wristwatch, the Seiko Laurel. Now, in the old review of that SARK011, the chronograph version, I talked in depth to the history of Seiko and their watchmaking, and in particular talked about that Seiko Laurel watch. I'm not going to hammer that dead horse here. Suffice to say, though, that that is where the vast majority of the design influences for the dial come from, and it's a really good decision. I think that it's probably one of the most stunning and just really attractive, classically designed watches and dials, and I'm glad that Seiko is bringing that back in. I think it was for to commemorate some sort of anniversary, a 60th anniversary or something. Not the anniversary of that watch specifically, because that watch came out in 1913, well over 100, almost 105 years ago. It wasn't commemorating that watch, but commemorating something when they released this. Forgive me, I don't remember, but regardless, this was something of an anniversary-style watch. They did a few different Presage watches for that anniversary. They did a design with Romans, and don't get me wrong, I like Roman numeral watches, but this design I think is much more aesthetically pleasing for my tastes. Anyway, we're going to jump over to the tabletop. We're going to take a look at this watch up close. I'll give you all of the details and share my opinions and impressions about the watch with you. Then we'll come back over here for some of my final thoughts. Alright guys, here we have it, the Seiko Presage SARW025, as previously mentioned, very similar to the SARK011 that I reviewed in the past, which is a chronograph version of this watch. There's actually a third version, the SARX041, which is just a 3-hander with date. No power reserve indicator, as you can see over here on the left-hand side of the dial. Basic specifications about this watch: price point $800 US, roughly. A Japanese domestic market version, it has a price tag of 90,000 Japanese yen. I've seen it for sale around $750 to just about $800 online, so that's probably what you should expect to pay for one of these watches. The overall dimensions of this watch are just a hair bigger than I would prefer. We have a case diameter from side to side, not including the crown, of 40.5 millimeters with a lug width of 20 millimeters, which is nice. The thickness on this watch, though, and it's pretty hefty for basically a dress-style watch, comes in at about 13.5 millimeters, with a lug-to-lug from one extremity of the case to the other, or what I like to call the watch's wingspan, of just over 47 millimeters, kind of not quite 47.5, right in that ballpark. Overall, yeah, it's a little bit big in dimensions, both in the thickness and in the diameter of the case for this style of watch. But if you prefer a watch with a little bit more of a wrist presence, or if you have a bigger wrist, it's probably not going to be an issue for me. That's just, a hang-up that I have about these sort of casual or dressy, somewhat understated, non-dive watch, non-chronograph watch, non-pilot watches. I just like things to be a little more compact. Getting that out of the way, though, other specs that we have here, let's talk about those. We do have a slightly curved sapphire crystal, and that crystal features an AR coating on the underside. If I bring it up here at a nice little angle, you can sort of start to see that distortion effect from the curve, and you almost can't even notice that it's curved once you're looking at it in profile. But there is a slight curve or convex arch on that crystal. Very, very nicely done. Coupled with that white dial, which is not going to reflect light back at you like perhaps a glossy black dial might. That AR coating does work really well. Even if we pan it over towards my bright studio lights, you can still see the dial. It's not completely washed out. In standard lighting conditions, though, it seems to be absolutely outstanding. We do have some other basic features on this. We have a date complication and a subdial down at the 6 o'clock side, and we do also have a power reserve indicator over at the 9 o'clock side. A lot of people don't like the idea of a power reserve indicator because it's usually placed over here somewhat asymmetrically on the dial, and it kind of feels like it throws the flow of the design or the aesthetic off a little bit. I think that this one is implemented well, and I don't mind them. I like having the added functionality of the power reserve indicator, so it's generally not a big complaint. I have seen some PR scales on watch dials that do look a little out of place, but this one does work for me. We do have 100 meters of water resist, although no screw down crown, it's just a standard crown. But for a kind of dressy watch, 100 meters of water resistance is sort of atypical, I'd say. And certainly, you're not going to take a watch like this swimming, especially on the leather strap that it comes on. So I don't really know that water resist really factors in too much. I guess if you fall in a swimming pool or fall off the boat, you're not going to destroy your watch. So, that's cool, I suppose. We also do have a display case back, and that display case back showcases our 6R27 movement. We'll talk about that movement briefly here. The 6R27 caliber Seiko movement is a 29 jewel movement. It is a automatic movement with hand winding and hacking. We get a 45-hour power reserve. This movement runs at 28,800 vibrations or beats per hour. It is a descendant or in the family of the 6R series of movements, most notably the 6R15. Curiously, the 6R15 only runs at 21,600. So they've upped the frequency or the beat rate on this particular model. Accuracy out of the box from Seiko is at a specification of -15 to +25 seconds per day. Not an outstanding range of accuracy once we start approaching that $1,000 price point, and even below, if I'm being honest. That's one of my disappointments with Seiko movements in general, is they are not tightly regulated, or the tolerances for accuracy are not as tight as the Swiss ETA or Sellita counterpart movements that we find in watches at similar price points. For example, I think a standard, or probably more accurately an Elabor version of an ETA 2824 is going to have a specification of something like plus or minus 12 seconds per day. And you're going to find that level of movement in watches at this price point and below. Now, a lot of guys don't really care about accuracy if it's 30 seconds a day, 60 seconds a day. It doesn't really matter to them. They rotate watches so often that as long as it's not gaining, minutes and minutes per day, it's not going to affect them. I do care about accuracy a lot, so I prefer to have watches that run as accurately as possible. Again, that's one of my critiques or negatives when it comes to Seiko watches in this sort of more affordable bracket. Once we get up into those high-end movements in the Grand Seikos, or their extremely high accuracy quartz movements, that's not an issue. But when we're talking about the 7S26, the 4R, or the 6R series of movements, it's a little bit of a letdown for me. Your mileage, of course, may vary. The last thing to talk about as far as kind of features or specs is the strap that this comes on. This is a brown, I've seen it listed as crocodile. I don't know if it's real croc. Let's see if there's any sort of inscriptions on the inner of the strap. We just have a Seiko marking on that side, and then on this side looks like sort of a reference number and Japan. I doubt that it's real crocodile leather. It is nice though. Relatively thin, low profile, very pliable. It's not a very stiff strap, and that's one thing that I dislike about a lot of the more affordable straps that come on Seiko watches, is they're usually extremely glossy. And if we see the light here reflecting, this looks glossy. To the eye in person, it's really not a shiny, glossy, plasticky looking strap. It's actually really well done. I would be very much inclined to keep it on this strap. Of course, we have dual keepers, one sewn in and one floating, and then a very nice deployant clasp with dual button triggers. Super simple to use, of course. Locks down like so. The clasp itself is finished with the Seiko branding, probably laser etched or engraved into it, but otherwise a nice brush finishing. To deploy, you just push the dual triggers and open it up. It folds open onto a very nice high quality stainless steel machined swing arm. Overall, I like the strap, I like the clasp, so yeah, I would probably just keep it as is, which is, not normal for Seiko watches. Usually the first thing you do when you get one on leather is swap it out for something a little bit nicer. So at least you're not going to have to worry about doing something like that, at least in my opinion. With the basic features and specs out of the way, let's come in here and take a nice close look at this. First, we'll check out the case. On this watch, we have polished sides, and the polishing on JDM Seikos is always very nice. We got some fingerprints here, so I'll try to give it a little bit of a wipe and see if I can get it looking nicer for you guys. But yeah, a very nice mirrored high polish finish, and I'm always impressed with the level of polishing that comes on these JDM model Seiko watches. They do an excellent job. It's not the same level as that polishing that we saw on the Grand Seiko Snowflake that I reviewed recently, but it is still very nice. The tops of the lugs have a very nice straight grained satin brush finish. Come in here really close if I can to try to focus in on the brushing. It's very, very well done. The lugs have this very elegant curve, which is, aesthetically pleasing. It makes the watch feel maybe not quite as large as the dimensions would suggest, though I do still find it a little bit too large. On the right-hand side of the watch, we have that same great high-polished finishing, and of course the Seiko S-signed crown. That crown is kind of a conical, almost cupcake shape, if you will. Very good size, a little bit on the large size, but definitely not oversized, and of course that S engraved there into the crown. The bezel on this watch is, of course, also of high polish. It's nicely executed. Sometimes we get these smooth polished bezels and they're just too big, right? It feels like there's just too much bezel. This is proportioned very well in my opinion. It doesn't seem to want to overwhelm the case or the lugs. It just feels like it belongs. Yeah, overall, again, very impressed. Always when I look at these JDM Seiko watches, this one's no exception. Not quite to Grand Seiko standards based on what I've seen so far, but still done very, very well. Now, of course, this is a hand wind movement, so not a screw down crown. You can just start hand winding it, and if we keep an eye on that power reserve indicator as I hand wind it, I'll let the seconds hand counterbalance move. You can see that power reserve indicator hand over by the 9 o'clock position is inching its way up towards the 40-hour indication on the scale. Hand winding is typical of what you would expect in a kind of mid-range Seiko. It feels good, it's responsive. not overly tight or gritty. It's well done. Pulling the crown all the way out, of course, lets us hack the movement as you would expect, and you can adjust the time. Put in the first position, lets us quick set the date on the sub-dial there. We can set the time up here and get the hands just out of the way a little bit so we get a nice good look. Of course, depressing that crown gets the movement back up and running. The main event, the showstopper for this watch, is that dial. I had mentioned in the introduction, this is very much inspired by that original Seiko wristwatch, the Seiko Laurel, with that red 12 marker and then the 1 through 11 going around in black with that really just beautiful antique style font or type. I really, really like it. On the very outer edge, we have a printed on seconds or minutes track that is graduated with, it looks like third or fourth seconds. It's hard to see here in the viewfinder, but very, very nice, very clean, and very precise. At the 12 o'clock side, below that red 12 marker, we have an applied Seiko logo, and then the word automatic in that that cursive almost script that they use a lot of the time. It just gives it a little, I don't know, a little hint of kind of classiness, if you will. At the 6 o'clock side, we have that date complication in a sub-dial, implemented very, very well, recessed into the dial, as we can see there. And then, of course, the power reserve indicator over at the 9. On the outer edge of that power reserve scale, you can see that there's a silver frame or track, and you almost can't even notice it with the naked eye if you have bad vision like me, but there's a couple little pips at the 12, at the 20, at the 40, and then all the way at the edge of the scale, which would represent, I suppose, that 48 or 45th hour of power reserve. It's done well. It is also recessed. I do like it. I know a lot of people, again, don't like power reserve indicators on their dial because it sort of clutters it up and throws off the balance. For me, though, it's absolutely not a problem. Now take a look at the seconds hand and that counterbalance crescent moon as it comes down towards the date complication. You can see that that crescent overlaps with the center post of the date hand just perfectly. A nice little attention to detail, as you can see right there. I really like that. It's that they put a little bit of thought and effort into getting all of that stuff to line up is really cool. Now, other than the basics of the dial, something that's really interesting is the texture of the dial. It's kind of like a little bit of a guilloche texturing, I guess. I don't know how well it'll come in on camera here. It's got sort of like a vertical striping, or I don't know what you would describe that. It looks like a fine dress shirt, though, if you look at one really, really up close. It's just got a very nice grain or texture. You don't see it at wrist's length away with the naked eye, but once you really drill in here and take a look at it, it's very classy. It's very elegant. I think it looks, fantastic. There is, on that seconds track, just a very small printing for each 5-minute or second mark, which I didn't point out. And then at the very, very bottom there, it says Japan, and then some other text. It's usually the movement designation that I can't read with my my old, tired eyes as they're starting to become. The hour hand, minute hand, and seconds hand are blued. It's going to not show up real well in my lighting here. It looks almost black, but if I can kind of catch some light, you're getting a lot of glare there, of course, but you can see that they are blued. I don't know if they're painted or if they're blued by the heat bluing process that is typical of more high-end watches. I don't think it really matters. It still looks very nice. It's attractive. It is subtle. Again, it almost looks like black in the majority of lighting, but when you catch it in the right light, the handset looks cool. The handsets are of kind of like a leaf style, and the little sub-seconds hands also follow that style, or the aesthetic cue from the hour and minute hands. With the exception of that crescent counterbalance, you basically just have a very, very sharp, straight, needle-like seconds hand. Very, very beautiful design, and I'm a big fan of it. Like I said, they pulled this design from a very old watch, their first wristwatch, and I hope that they keep this style in production. I really hope they make a 36, 37, 38 millimeter version that is just the time only, maybe with a date. in the sub-seconds or a sub-second style, that would be cool. A two-hander with a sub-second style and no date in 36 to 38 millimeters, I would probably strongly consider picking that up. But at this size, it's a beautiful watch and I can appreciate it for what it is, but it's certainly not the right watch for me. On my 6 3/4 inch wrist, yeah, it's not unwearable. It's not, like Invicta oversized or anything, but just a little bit bolder and a little bit larger than I prefer, especially once we get into that thickness, which it's going to be difficult to give you a nice view of that given how I'm sitting in front of the camera. But yeah, it wears tall on the wrist. It wears big on the wrist. It is fantastic looking though, and I just wish it was scaled down a little bit for my preferences, but there it is. The strap is a little long, and on the end section, I mean, there's your final hole, and then you have a whole, I don't know, 1.5 inches or better of extra tail. It's just a hair too long, and as you can see, it flips up quite far on my wrist, even with the keeper pulled up here. It doesn't pin it down closely. I don't like a lot of extra tail hanging off. It's probably my only complaint about the strap. Otherwise, I think the strap's well done. And, I think the watch is well done. I typically wear a watch more lower on the wrist, as you can tell. Do you get an interference with this somewhat large crown? Not really. I mean, it touches, but it's not like it's impeding my movement in any way, shape, or form. So that's not a problem at all either. But yeah, there's a quick wrist shot on my 6 3/4 inch wrist and my overall impressions of this watch. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed that presentation of the Seiko Presage SARW025. Really like the watch, except for the size. And like you saw on my wrist, it wears okay. I could pull it off. I could wear it daily if I wanted to, I guess. But it just, for like a kind of casual, somewhat understated, bordering on dressy watch, I prefer things to be scaled down a little bit more. If you have a larger wrist, or if you like watches with a little bit more presence, this is going to be a perfect watch for you. I think that the price is pretty good. Let me double check my notes. It's got a 90,000 Japanese yen price, which converts out to about 800 US dollars. It's not grand Seiko quality, and if you saw my recently reviewed Grand Seiko Snowflake video, you're gonna obviously see the striking differences in terms of the overall fit and finish of the case in particular. It's not quite there, but it is very, very good in terms of the polishing, the brushing, the overall finishing of the case. It is outstanding, and I think that it's probably a reasonable asking price at between, I see them for $750 to $800. There's not a ton of equal value watches on the market with this level of fit, finish, and quality that I have seen yet. Now, it does use the Seiko 6R series of movements, and they're not bad movements, but once we start approaching that $1,000 number, I'm kind of wanting something a little bit more sophisticated. Truth be told, I think Seiko is kind of trying to bring that 6R series of movement a little bit upmarket. We've seen in recent years that they have discontinued a lot of the JDM watches that featured that movement at around the $500 price point, and they have been releasing new watches that feature the 4R series of movements and pushing this 6R movement up into that almost $1,000 tier. I think it's a little bit of not a bait and switch. That's probably not the right way to describe it, but it does seem to me like they're trying to push the 6R up market a little bit and make us believe that it's better than it really is. And it's not a bad movement. Again, it's good quality. The timekeeping on it, specifications of -15 to +25 is nothing to blow your skirt up. That's not outstanding. Your typical ETA movements, I think, are around +or -12, so you're getting better out of the box accuracy with those ETA movements than this. So yeah, I don't hate the movement, I don't love the movement when we're approaching this price point. I'd like something a little bit better though. All right, guys, thanks again. And to close this out, I will say that if you want to help support the channel, there's a number of ways you can do that. Of course, subscribe and like this video, all of that stuff that you're supposed to do on YouTube. I know you guys already all know that already. You could also go down into the description of this video and follow me on any of my social media accounts, be it Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I have links down below. Of course, there's also a link to my Patreon account if you'd like to help support me. To donate a little bit every month, that would be appreciated. And a big thank you to the folks that are already over there helping me out. I appreciate it very much. Finally, I always have links to the products that I review on Amazon through my affiliate account. If you click on that Amazon link before you do any shopping on Amazon, I get a small commission. Those commissions do add up. They do really help. All right, I'm going to wrap this up and say until later on this week, I guess, I'll have another review. And thanks again. Bye now.